Hey, my name is Hedge and welcome to this Rome Total War video. Today we're gonna make a faction tier list, something I want to do for a long time. I've played this game for thousands of hours and I have always enjoyed this game. I've played this for so long and I want to give this a try. Without further ado, what are we gonna base the tiers off? Tiers are based on overall scaling from early to late game. Some factions are early very strong, some factions are late game very strong, and you also have factions that can snowball really hard. So we're gonna take that in consideration as well. Tiers are based on average experienced human players' performance. This means we're talking about players that have hundreds up to thousands hours of experience into this game, who can use and abuse the strongest parts of every faction and that have a general feeling with the game. Tiers are also based on a very hard campaign setting. This is the setting where the AI gives the most resistance and is actually challenging if you play certain factions, of course. And the list is opinion based. This makes it open for discussion and I really want to know what you think about my tier list. So leave some comments down below and let me know what you think and if you would change something in this tier list. Without further ado, let's go! First off on the list is Spain. We put this faction on the bottom of this list for some reasons, but first the pros. Spain naturally has few enemies. The only enemies they have early game are Carthage with one city in Iberia and Gaul with one city in Iberia. They have a unique unit roster. They have the Scutari that are their equivalent of the Hastati, which Thropila have a decent morale, pretty good organized, and they have the Bull Warriors, a very strong mid to late game unit. Overall, they have a really okay, strong, early army variety. They also have very good temples, where you can upgrade your units with experience, which instantly translates into attack and defense stats. And they also have a missile upgrade temple, so you can upgrade your ranged units. They don't have many ranged units, they have slingers and skirmishers, but if you use them well and upgrade, they can actually make a significant difference in the early to mid and maybe late game, but it's all about how you use them. The cons: they have a long travel time in between settlements. This is due to the terrain of Iberia. There's a lot of mountains and hills, so it will take up to 6 turns to travel from one settlement to another, which makes it hard to support your armies in case of a siege, or also collect your army in general to take over other faction settlements like the ones I mentioned, the one city in Gaul and Carthage. To gather them, you have to cross enemy territory, which isn't without risks. They have a bad economic region. They do border the Mediterranean, but the wrong side of the Mediterranean. They will most likely trade with the northern of Africa and a little bit with the Gaelic region, the southern of France, and maybe with Italy. But that's really, really late into the game. They have a small unit roster. They don't really have late game units. They have no ranged unit. Their cavalry is pretty poor. They only have round shield cavalry and long shield cavalry. Nothing special, something that Carthage has as well. And the Roman factions have way better units. They can't properly develop the settlements, as I mentioned maybe earlier. They can only build up to tier 3 settlements, like all the barbaric factions, where they can't properly develop cities. They will grow and you can make good armies out of them, but you can't do anything else the further the game progresses. Next on the list, Numidia. Also, just as Spain, same corner of the map, naturally has few enemies. The only enemies they naturally have is Carthage and sometimes Skippy Eye, if they decide to push on from Carthage into your territory. But it's depending on how the AI plays the game. They have a unique unit roster. They have their Spearmen, their Legionaries, and their Camel Riders. The Legionaries can be compared with the Roman Principes. They have about the same morale, same damage output. They can't be compared with the Roman Legionaries because they can't form a testudo, and their overall stats are just way worse. But they are a good, solid mid-game infantry unit. They have a well-varied unit, as I mentioned. They have a good variety of ranged units, skirmishers, slingers, archers, militia cavalry. They have spearmen, they have legionaries, they have a good variety of cavalry with their camel riders as well. So you can't complain about that. The big cons are long travel times in between settlements. It takes about 5 to 6 turns to travel from one city to another, and they have one settlement all across the African coast in the Egypt part of the world. So that's something you don't even talk about if you talk about travel times. It's all on his own, and it will probably be conquered by Egypt in the early game. There's also a general there, so you either move him or he will probably get killed. The provinces are separated, as I mentioned. They have 2 settlements in the northern part of Africa, but they have one in the Egyptian part of the world. They have a poor economic region. Africa is just nothing. There's nothing to trade. There are not many cities to trade with. They naturally have 3 ports, but because one is at the Egyptian part of the world, it won't trade with anyone without the trade rights you have to gain from Egypt, but Egypt will conquer you, so you will eventually lose it. And the 2 cities you have on the Mediterranean is probably trading with Spain and maybe Carthage, but it's on the wrong part of the Mediterranean, that's for sure. Their mid to late game is pretty weak. The legionaries aren't compared to the Roman ones. Their cavalry is pretty easily countered by spearmen. And yeah, their ranged units aren't really that good because they are not upgraded really fast or big. They have a bad variety of temples. Their temples are purely based on happiness, growth, and trade. Something they do need if you want to like manage your economics with Numidia, but in the long run you will need some temples that boost your experience, boost your weapons from your armies to make them match with other late game factions, like the Romans, who you will encounter pretty quickly if you conquered Iberia and maybe Carthage in the mid game. You have to match the Romans as well, so you will need those upgraded weapons and experience. So they don't have it. Bad variety of temples. Next on the list, Parthia. Parthia, the provinces border the edge of the world, so it's just a black void, nothing there, no hordes come from that part. That's something different with barbarian invasion and also medieval 2, where the hordes spawn in the void and they will like move from east to west and destroy anything in the path. Will not happen in Rome Total War, so it's completely safe, no risks from that side. They do have strong cavalry units, the cataphracts, the horse archers. They are strong, can be abused, but they really lack infantry. They only have Eastern Infantry and Hillmen, which are just overall very bad units. We don't talk about them. They have poor morale, really bad stats, and their upkeep is way too high for this kind of units. They are in a bad economic region. There is not much to trade, especially because they're on the edge, so there's nothing on their eastern side. Everything in the west will probably be their enemy, so they will not gain trade rights. And the cities they have, they can't trade on the sea. The only sea they border on is the Caspian Sea, so they can trade with in between 2 of their own cities and 1 city of Sevilla. Nothing special, nothing to be gained there. They naturally push into strong enemies, the Seleucids, the Egyptian, eventually maybe Pontus if they get pretty far on, but the Parthians are easily matched by the Seleucids and the Egyptians. So you will have a tough time pushing into their territory. Your horse archer will help you a lot with it, and you will be able to match them, but it takes some good organization. Your starting settlements are underdeveloped, so yeah, they don't really grow fast. There's nothing to build over there. There's a limited amount of troops you can train. It will take a lot of time for you to grow, and in the meanwhile, the Seleucids and the Egyptians can snowball really hard. Something we'll talk about later. They have a poor variety of temples. As I mentioned earlier, they are not able to train troops properly. It will not gain much experience or weapon training or anything. So compared to the counterparts like the Egyptians, they will not gain any of that. Next on the list, Armenia. Armenia, I really doubted about putting them on number 16. Armenia is one of my favorite Eastern factions. They have a really unique roster. But first, provinces are bordering the edge of the world. Not really too. They not border the edge of the world, but the only risks they face on the eastern side is Parthia, who I mentioned don't really have a particular strong early game, and if you like put some good troops around them, like your horse archers, you will be able to face them or maybe beat them early game to gain some settlements. There's nothing to fear from that side. Strong cavalry units, just as the Parthians, they are able to make cataphracts. They have a unique unit called the Archer Cataphract, same as Cataphract, but then with archers on top, which have long range bows with good defense stats. They have their own kind of legionaries, they're same as the Numidians if I recall correctly, so nothing to be compared with the Roman legionaries, but you can compare them with Principes, so still a good solid unit of heavy infantry. They have their own version of Eastern Spearmen, so they have phalanxes to match cavalry, which is very strong. They do have a decent variety of temples, nothing special, but you can work with them and you can in that way build up your economics, which is very useful in this case. The early infantry units, like I mentioned earlier, and something more Eastern factions suffer from, are the Eastern infantry, with the hillmen being their early infantry units. They're nothing special, poor morale, high upkeep, bad stats, don't use them, just ignore them. Bad economic region, mentioned it a little bit before, they don't border the seas, only start with 2 cities, so they have to conquer some cities early game to like get trade going on and do some diplomatic tricks to make alliances and trade rights and stuff and keep their economics flowing. They naturally push towards strong enemies. Besides the Parthians, who are not really a threat to you, you push into Pontic territory and Seleucids territory, and even more south the Egyptians, which are naturally stronger factions. So it's pretty hard. If you go to the north to the Scythian area, there's nothing much to gain there. Cities are really far from each other, so it will take you a long time to conquer those, and you don't have that time because you don't have the economics to actually go that way. It will take you too long to build something. The starting settlements are underdeveloped. They are like nothing special. They are tier 1 when they start. You can upgrade 1 to tier 2 instantly, but the first 3 to 4 turns will be about building up basic cities, before you go conquer the world. Gaul. Some people will doubt the decision to put them on 15 as the not the first barbaric faction. Spain is just below them, but yeah. They start with many settlements, which is a big pro. They have 7 settlements, if I recall correctly. 2 in northern Italy, 1 in Spain. France is all theirs except for 2 cities. 1 is rebel, 1 is Britain territory. And it's a decent economic region. They border the Mediterranean down in France. They will eventually trade with Italy. They do trade with Italy early game with Batavium and Mediolanum. So nothing to complain about it, but it's nothing special. Like nothing compared to the Greece territory where you can actually make really good profits. Few unique units. They're hunter archers and the druids. Hunter archers are unique, nothing special, probably very weak archers compared to the Roman archers and other archers in the world. And the druids are very strong though. They give a morale boost to your nearby units when they're chanting, and they have a solid stats, but they are in small groups, so don't use them as real melee units. But they are very unique and very useful. They have a strong mid to late game with their chosen swordsmen, with their druids, with their big territory at the start of the game. They can easily expand, and they have a very good variety of temples, just as Spain. Same as Spain. They can gain experience with their temples. They can gain upgraded missile weapons with their temples. So their skirmishers, and archers can be upgraded to a useful level if used properly. Yeah. The cons are they naturally have many enemies. Britain will push down into your territory. If you're lucky, they will push towards Germany. But if their AI is facing the player, they will most likely face the player first. Sometimes the Britons and the Germanics will make an alliance and will push together into your territory, which makes your campaign really hard. Also to consider that the House of Julii will naturally push into northern Italy and eventually cross the Alps into France. So you will have some trouble with them as well. And if Spain decides to be useful in your campaign, they will push you from the south as well, but that will never happen, so ignore that. Starting settlements are kind of underdeveloped. 50% of their cities start on tier 0, so you still have to like build a warlord's home, or I'm not sure how it's called, but you have to build them from scratch. There's nothing in there, nothing to be gained. Although they have Batavium, Mediolanum and Numidia. It's not called Numidia. It's called something else. It's this village in Spain. Yeah. They have some big cities, but not much. Like 50% is still underdeveloped. Then we have Botania. So, Botania, very unique faction. Starts on a safe island, so there is not much threat coming into their mainland. They do have unique roster units. They have head hurlers, wood raiders, and the only barbarian faction with chariots. We will talk about those units later, because they're all based on the temples you build. They have a strong mid to late game. Wood raiders, good offensive. Chariots are unique if used properly, can be very strong, but it's all about your playstyle, and it can work in your favor, but it can also work against you. The good variety of temples. This is mainly based because one of the temples gives them 2 extra units to train. The head hurlers and the wood raiders. Head hurlers give a morale boost, not to you, but they give a morale penalty to your enemy. If they get hit by those flying decapitated heads, they will fear your troops. They also have druids, which give a morale boost to you. Then you have really strong offensive units like wood raiders from that same temple. So absolutely one of the best temples. No, that's not true, but very useful to have. They have the chariots, good for hit and run, not for like long extended melee battles or anything. They will fall down very quickly. The cons, they are starting in a bad economic region. They have some ports, but they can only trade with Gaul and maybe with Germany in the late game when they're able to get a port down. Yeah, so there's nothing much to gain. They're very far away from profitable regions. Italy is far south. Greece is even further south. It's also where all the world wonders are, so they will most likely not get there soon. They have no usual cavalry. The only cavalry they have are chariots. So that's what I say about your playstyle. You have to adapt. It's all about hit and run. Your chariots will fail to survive in a long extended melee battle. They don't have archers. They really depend on their slingers and their head hurlers. And they don't have a way to upgrade them properly. So, yeah. It's a really weak spot for them. Then we have the unique faction of Thrace. Thrace is a half barbaric, half Hellenic faction, and they start off in a decent economic region near the excellent economic region of Greece with world wonders near Turkey, modern day Turkey. They have a well varied unit roster, very unique unit roster with Falksmen, Pikemen, and Bastarnae. As I mentioned, half barbaric faction, half Hellenic faction, so that's why they have a mix of both. They are counted as a Hellenic faction. That's why they have the ability to develop their settlements to tier 5 instead of only tier 3, which makes them have the upper hand above some barbaric factions in the late game, if they make the late game. They have good temples but no variety. I think they only have 2 temple choices with some good things in there, but no variety. They have weak cavalry units. They only have Greek cavalry and their general unit, so there's no variety there, and they are very weak. Naturally push towards strong enemies. They push into the Macedonians and the Greece, and eventually meet up with the Brutii, where they have to fight the stronger factions compared to their own, especially because they depend on their late game powerhouses like the Bastarnae and the Phalanx Pikemen. They have some issues with matching their counterparts. Next up in the list is Dasia. So some people would also put Dasia lower in the list, but Dasia has some big pros to them. They are bordering a lot of rebel territory, so they are easily able to expand in the early game. They have about 5 bordering rebel settlements. They are not developed that much, but it's territory and you can get some trade going on. If you're fast in the early game, you can even go to the Mediterranean, get the rebel settlements over there before the Brutii or the Macedon do. They have a unique unit roster. They are the only barbaric faction that can make ballistas, so that's a very nice addition to your unit roster in siege equipment. They have some very strong late game cavalry, and they have their Falksmen, which are also be able to train by Thrace. There are the only 2 factions who are able to make them, if I'm not mistaken. They have a well-varied unit roster, as I mentioned, siege equipment. They have a lot of cavalry options. They have early access to archers. They have their Falksmen. They have their warbands. So it's a well-varied unit roster. And they have very good temples. So, to the cons. They start landlocked. One of the few that start landlocked. And landlocked means no ports. Ports are OP in trade in the Rome Total War. If you have no ports, you don't have trade. So, bad economic region. But their ability to early gain some rebel settlements next to the sea makes them able to counter that issue. But you have to be quick in the early game to get those territories. They naturally push towards enemy territory. I didn't mention strong because it depends on which way you go. But in the end, you will face the Macedons, the Thracians, the Germanies, sometimes even the Britons if they decide to push on further into Germany than expected. And eventually, maybe Julii, Gaul, and the Bruttii. So many enemies. Which makes it a hard campaign to play, but a very fun and unique campaign to play. Yeah, don't underestimate the Dacians. Would recommend to try this campaign if you haven't. The Pontic faction, Pontus, strong starting position, starts in Anatolia in the north with 2 cities, if I'm not mistaken. They have some sea trade going on. Their cities are near one another. It's a good economic region, near some world wonders. If they conquer some rebel settlements and some Seleucid settlements, they are able to gain them really fast. They're easy to expand early game to weak nearby enemies. Because the Seleucids have issues with their early game, being very spread and etc., where we're gonna talk about later. Also, the Armenians, which are up in the north, aren't as strong and competitive in the early game, so they are quite safe. They have a unique unit roster. They have chariot archers, they have their Pontic heavy cavalry, and they have the Cappadocian cavalry, so they have some strong cavalry units. Early game, weak infantry units. Like all Eastern units, Eastern infantry with hillmen, don't expect them to do good. They have a good variety of temples, by the way, didn't mention, but they do. I think they have a below average late game. It's a little bit hard to measure them with the other faction that are around, because the Seleucids have a strong late game, the Egyptians have a long late game, and the Armenians have a well varied late game, mid to late game army, so they can match you as well. I don't really expect the Parthians to be a real threat, but they have strong cavalry as well to be matched. I think their cataphracts are even stronger than your Cappadocian cavalry, so yeah. Next up, the Seleucids. The Seleucids are a very unique faction. They are based off the old empire of Alexander the Great, and yeah, it's really hard to put them anywhere on the tier list. They can be bottom tier, but they can also be top tier. It depends on how good you are and how you are able to survive the early game. They have a very good economic region. They start with and near world wonders, which makes them able to grow faster. And they have some unique units. A very well varied unit roster, strong unit roster, and decent variety of temples. They have their silver pikemen, they have their legionaries, they have their war elephants, and many more. So this is maybe the most well-rounded army there is in the entire game. But they naturally have many enemies. The Greeks can attack them early game. The Pontus can attack them early game. Armenia can come down and attack you. Parthia will attack you. Egypt will attack you. And you don't have the resources to maintain a big army early game. And your early army is very weak. Your militia hoplites, which you are heavily depending on, isn't strong. Poor morale. No real stats. Your cities are super spread. Long travel time between settlements. So it's hard to support and keep up with all the interactions with other factions. So that's why it's on 10. It's like it's in the middle. It's a really fun campaign, challenging campaign to play, but man, there's so much going on, and above average players will be able to manage. And if you survive the early game and everything is settled down, your defense is in order, you will be able to attack other factions and gain territory fairly fast and eventually scale up to a snowballing faction with really strong units. And yes, that will make your life way easier. Next up, Cetia. Some people will argue with me that I put Cetia only on place 9. Sevilla, all the pros, naturally has a few enemies because they're on the steppe. All enemy cities are far away. It's a long travel time, so most people will not naturally push into that areas as well. They are really strong in the offense with their cavalry. They have unique units. They are one of the few factions that have women in their army. They have their maidens, they have their nobles, and they're all nearly all ranged units. As we know, ranged units are OP, and they are well varied in the cavalry units. That's what makes them very unique. A steppe horde faction with a lot of horses, which they can abuse, which makes them able to snowball eventually if you play them correctly. The only few cons there are the long travel time between settlements, the lack of infantry units. The only infantry units they have are peasants and axemen, which is nothing to talk about, and their bad variety of temples. Yeah, their temples aren't particularly strong. They improve growth, and they have one temple that will improve horsemen. And although they have many horsemen, because they are a barbaric faction, they will not have a tier 3 above tier 3 temple, which doesn't give them a real advantage. It gives them some advantage, but nothing much. So, next on the list, the Greek city-states. Pros: extremely good economic region. They start off in Greece. They start off on Sicily, in Anatolia, and that specific region is a gold mine. You can gain so much money in this region because many world wonders are there. There are 4 out of 7 world wonders are in that region. So a lot of money to make there. They start off with and near world wonders. They started with the Colossus of Rhodos, and they are near Halicarnassus and that other rebel city that have 2 world wonders. They are near Corinth, that actually has the statue of Zeus. So if they are able to get those, they quickly can obtain those 4 world wonders, which gives them a really strong early position. They are very strong in defense, like many Hellenic factions with spearmen. Spearmen are super strong in defense. If they get attacked, they only have to wait for the enemy to just run into their spears. They have a unique unit roster. They have their special hoplites, the normal hoplites, the armored hoplites, and the Spartan hoplites. Spartan hoplites, excellent in morale, unique for a few cities. Obviously, you can train them in Sparta, and I think you can also train them in Syracuse. So, very unique even for them, because they can't train them everywhere. I would say the armored hoplites are stronger. They have comparable attack stats, but their defense is just way higher than the Spartan hoplites. Spartan hoplites do have excellent morale compared to the good morale, but the good morale and the excellent morale will not really change that much in between the units, and I think the defensive stats weigh more in this case only. They have very good mercenaries. In Greece, you can obtain proper hoplites as your mercenaries, but also Cretan archers. Cretan archers are by far the strongest archer unit in the game. Long range unit, high attack, low defense, but they don't need them because they can shoot the whole army down within a matter of seconds if they're upgraded properly with a lot of experience. They have a decent variety of temples, nothing much to mention about. The long travel time between settlements gives them a struggle early game. It's all they start off in different areas of the world. They will need a lot of ships and boats and a lot of turns to travel in between the settlements. Provinces are separated, and they really lack cavalry. They only have Greek cavalry, which is a bad cavalry unit. Next up in the list, Carthage. Carthage. I put this Carthage pretty high up. I really doubted about them as well, but I think this is a proper rating. They start off in a good economic region near the Italian Greek area. They have Carthage as a settlement, which is a good, fast-growing settlement. Also, Thapsus is a very good, strong, fast-growing settlement because they have a lot of tradable goods and resources, a lot of farm production in that area. They have unique unit rosters with their sacred band, the sacred band cavalry, Libyan spearmen. So they have a good variety. They also have their Iberian infantry. So they have a well-varied unit roster. They are able to match the Romans early game. And that's something important. They start off against the Romans on Sicily, and with their cheap upkeep and their fairly strong cavalry, they are able to match the Romans early game and push the Skippy Eye off Sicily, which gives the Romans a really hard time to recover from. They have a decent variety of temples. All their temples are based on growth and farm. So, like I mentioned in Numidia has the same, and I call them bad variety of temples. This is because they don't have fast-growing settlements. Carthage already has a good base production of farms, etc., and fast-growing settlements. If you throw more farm production on there by using your temples, you will go even faster. So it's a stackable bonus, and it will snowball real hard if you give it a couple of turns, which gives you the ability to create bigger armies and stronger units early game, because you have a tier 3 up to tier 4 city going within 20 turns. It says long travel time between settlements, which is not really true. So ignore that. Provinces are separated. They are separated because they are like... there are long travel times, by the way. Long travel times because they have a city in Iberia. They have a city on Sicily. They have a city called Palma, Caralis. Caralis, Thapsus, and Carthage can easily travel in short turns, but to travel to Palma or Iberia or even Sicily, it takes a little bit longer. I think from 2 up to 5 turns or something. They naturally push towards strong enemies, and I don't really mean Numidia. You don't push towards Numidia at first. That's something you clear out later. But I mean the Romans and the Greeks. You have to conquer Sicily as soon as possible. You don't want the Romans to militarize Messana and get a strong hold on Sicily. The Greeks already start off with a tier 3 city on Sicily called Syracuse. Don't let them get a grab on that island, because if you do, you will regret later. On 6, Macedon. Macedon, extremely good economic region. They already own the statue of Zeus, which is, in my opinion, the best world wonder there is. The provinces are all close to each other. They are bordering one another, so you can easily support other cities, move troops from one another, so you can all easily focus one city on economic resources, one on military, one on happiness, and you can easily like combine that all and make every city profits from the strength from another. They start off with and near world wonders. As I mentioned, they already have one, and they can easily cross the waters to get to Anatolia to get the others. They have a strong defense because they have long pikes. They have phalanx pikemen, bronze shield pikemen, and they also have strong cavalry because other than the Greeks, they have Macedonian cavalry and another one which I forgot the name about, something the Seleucids have as well. They have a good variety of temples. They have one of the best temples in the game. They have a temple that gives you plus 3 missile weapons on tier 5, and they also have a temple that gives you morale. Morale is one of the biggest game changers in this in Rome. Morale changes everything on the battlefield. If you have a morale bonus, you are most likely to win, because your armies will keep on fighting without any doubt. They will not stagger, they will not rout, they will just keep on going until they die. So morale, excellent bonus to have on your temples. Combined with your missile upgrades, it can make a army real strong. They do naturally have many enemies. Brugii will cross the waters, push into Greece. Greece will probably push up as well to gain your world wonders. You could gain Athens, which is not yours, but you will compete for it. Thrace will come down to meet you at Byzantium and eventually push further into Bylazora and Thessalonica. So yes, a lot is going on in your area. Maybe Dasia will even come down to conquer some cities from you, because yeah, they have to gain some territory for economic profits. They do lack range units. They don't have archers, if I recall correctly, or only one type of archers. I'm not sure. I think they do have skirmishers. So keep it in mind. Strong defensive units, strong cavalry, but lack of archers. Then, on number 5, Germany, the strongest barbarian faction in the game. Why? They have such a unique roster. But first, provinces are really close to each other. You can travel from one side of the Germanic Empire to the other within 3 to maybe 4 turns, which is acceptable. But all the cities in between can reach one another within 1 to 2 turns. Very useful, especially when you have to reinforce your settlements that are bordering Botania and Gaul, and as well the Julii, who can push up from the south through the Alps into your territory. They do border rebel territory in the east and southeast. It's the same territory Dasia wants to conquer early game. So if you make a quick move, you can actually gain 3 easy settlements over there, and it will make your game a little bit easier because you have some more territory, more trade going on, more money, etc, etc. Unique unit roster, there we go. That's a lot. They have their own version of X-Men, can be compared to the Wood Raiders of the Britons, a very strong offensive unit. Don't use them for the defense, because they don't have any defense. They have their shield, but it's nothing special. You also have the Berserkers. Berserkers, insane units. They can ruin whole armies with their axes or whatever they do. They spin around, they ruin enemy armies. Also very good offensive. A little bit less good in defense, but we all say a strong offense is better than a good defense. No, we don't, but you get what I mean. They have Screeching Woman, a morale penalty giving unit towards the enemy. If they screech, the morale of the enemy will go down. And morale is everything in this game, like mentioned earlier. They have a insane variety of cavalry. The one I'm showing right here is the Gothic Cavalry, something the Scythians have as well, but the Germanics have them as well. So, strong in the offense, strong unit roster, very well varied unit roster. Yeah, they naturally have a few enemies. Yeah, a few, I mean, most likely just Britain and Gaul will have their own troubles with Julii, so they will most likely either like fight with Britain and then focus on Julii. But Julii will sometimes push up to you, but the Alps will prevent you from them getting to your territory early game. It will give you some spare time to build up your army, to build up your cities, to make your territories secure. So they have a decent variety of temple, nothing special to mention. They start off in a bad economic region, just like Britain. They start up in the north, not on a separate island, but there's no much ports. They don't border any economically profitable areas like the Greece and the Macedons. They don't have ports in the start of the game, so you don't have any trade going on early game. It's all based on roads. Like I mentioned, far away from profitable regions. They start with a lot of underdeveloped settlements though. They start off with 5 settlements, which where 4 of them are underdeveloped. They start with tier 0 or tier 1. So you need time to build up your regions. Trier is the only tier 2 settlements you start with, if I'm not mistaken. But it's nothing to mention. You start with underdeveloped settlements, but you got the time to build them up. Next one, and this may surprise everyone, and most likely because they are always mentioned as a group of factions. But on place 4, the Julii. I placed the Julii here, and I separate them from the Roman factions for some reasons. First, the pros, good economic region. They start off in northern Italy, which is near the Mediterranean, or on the Mediterranean. They are able to trade with the Greeks and the Brutii eventually, and the rest of Italy, so that's a good economic region. They start with an alliance pact with the Roman faction, so they have a natural defensive area around them. Not much enemies infiltrate Italy early game. They have a very well varied unit roster, strong unit roster. The Marian reforms are absolutely a power boost for any Roman faction, and they have a decent variety of temples, nothing much. It's all about population growth. Why do they have the population growth temples? Because they naturally expand into a less profitable region. They can easily expand into the barbaric territory, which you naturally do Senate missions, Segesta, and then Mediolanum, Batavium, and you eventually just push up in the less developed area of the barbarians. So you need those temples to grow them and make them profitable cities. But there are no world wonders, there's no sea trade going on there, so they will never be as good as the other Roman factions. Or another faction I'm going to mention. Overall, very easy campaign to play, not much challenging, very fun. The Julii do match the historic color red of the Romans, so overall just a very fun, easy faction to play, not very challenging. These are the unique, the units they have, not very unique, because all Romans have. The only unique unit they have is the Samnite Gladiator. Every Roman faction gets one unique unit in out of their arena. That's what I wanted to say. They also can get Arcani from one of their temples, but we don't mention them either because they are not really a good unit. Then on 3, the big surprise, the one that's separating the Romans, the Egyptians. The Egyptians are also a very unique faction. They start off in a very good economic region on the Mediterranean near themselves, because they have cities along the coast everywhere. They have a city on an island. They are near the Colossus of Rhodes, which gives them trade possibilities. Just overall very profitable. They necessarily have a few enemies. They start off in the south of the Eastern Hemisphere, in Egypt, and the only thing they have to fear are the Seleucids, but the Seleucids have a really weak early game, and that's what they naturally do. They expand into the vulnerable Seleucids, so they have nothing to fear. On the other side, in the North Africa front, they only have one city of Numidia, but as I mentioned, Numidia has nothing to do there. Their economics is horrible. They can't properly build anything there. They do border rebel territory, easy to expand. Early game, Bostra, Petra, and that one unknown settlement in the middle of the desert, which Parthia always takes early game, but yeah, whatever. They have a very well varied unit roster. They have X-Men for their melee offensive combat. They have defensive units with their spearmen. They have a big variety of cavalry with chariots, but also with normal cavalry. They have units with excellent morale. The FIVERR Spearmen, the FIVERR-artist, their Nile cavalry. So there's nothing to complain about this amount of units in this variety. They have a good variety of temples. They can choose up to 5 temples, with all of them having their own strength. You have growth, happiness, law, unit improvements. There's so much to choose from, and it's absolutely insane. Way better than the Julii faction. And yeah, the only thing, long travel time between settlements, not really, but they have 3 settlements, Alexandria, Memphis, and that third one, and you can easily travel in between those cities. But then along the coast, all the way up to the north of Israel and near the Seleucids, they have Jerusalem and Sidon, and also their island settlement, which takes some longer to travel to, about 4 turns, so that's why I put it there. They do start off with 2 world wonders I didn't mention, but that's something that really works in their favor as well. As you can see, this is the unique unit. This is their chariots you see here. It's also their FIVERR bowmen. In the same style, they have the FIVERR spearmen, and that's the Nile cavalry with a long spear, very strong, good morale, etc. Just absolutely one of the strongest snowballing factions there is. Then we have the Skippy Eye. You can actually compare them with the Julii, but there's some little difference. They are in a very good economic region. They start off on Sicily near Carthage. That's a good, fast-growing, expanding city where you can trade with. They are closer to the Greek territory where the big money is earned. They start off with the Alliance Pact with all the other Roman factions. Very well varied units, but it's all the same strong unit roster. Marian reforms. They have a decent variety of temples. They're a little bit worse than the Julii. They are able to get the Temple of Neptune, which gives them 2 stronger battleships, which can actually snowball into like complete sea domination, but it isn't a big part of the game. But like if you want to, you can, and it makes it really fun if you can sink ships which contain big armies of the enemy. The cons provinces are separated. They started with Capua and Messana, Messana on Sicily, Capua on mainland Italy. The first few cities are a little bit tough to take, but they give a lot of profit. You first have to conquer Sicily, Syracuse, a tier 3 city, hard to take but very profitable and fast growing. Lilybaeum, fun city, good to have. But then you can cross over to mainland Africa and get Carthage and Thapsus, two really strong, fast-growing cities. So it's all worth it, but the first few cities may be tough to take. They're not bordering any rebel territory. So the first actual rebel city they could take is Lepnis Magna, which is a little bit below Thapsus. And yeah, that's the only rebel city I can think of they can quickly obtain. Yeah, that's what they have, so they can't expand real fast early by gaining underdeveloped rebel settlements, but they do obtain strong cities instead. Then, on the number 1, and without a doubt, the strongest faction there is in the game, the Brutii. They are in a very good economic region, just as the Skippy Eye. The only thing they have to do is cross the water, getting into Greece, and they are just right into the excellent economic region. There's so much money to be made there, and they naturally expand towards world wonders, which gives them a big extra boost in their power spike and snowball ability compared to the Julii and the Skippy Eye. So, yeah, nothing to say about that. It's just amazing. Really easy to obtain those. They start off with the Alliance Pact with the Roman factions as well. Very well varied units, strong unit roster, Marian reforms, and a good variety of temples. They have the Temple of Mars, which actually improves your unit strength. They have the best temples of all Romans. Well, cons, I couldn't think about anything. The Brutii don't really have weaknesses, I think. Maybe the weakness is that they have to fight fairly strong enemies. They have to move in strong enemy territory, but the Romans naturally have a stronger early game than anyone else. They have an easy campaign to play, and yeah, I don't think you can actually mention that as a con, especially because the Greece and the Macedonians started with poor morale units, while you have good morale units, and as I mentioned earlier, morale changes everything. So, yeah. So, without further ado, in short, this is the overall ranking, going from top to bottom and then left to right. Brutii, Skippy Eye, Egypt, Julii, Germany, Macedon, Carthage, Greek, Cetia, Seleucids, Pontus, Dasia, Thrace, Botania, Gaul, Armenia, Parthia, Numidia, and on the bottom we have Spain. If you think some factions should be moved on the tier list, let me know in the comments. I hope you thought this video was informative for you, and if you're a new player, you can maybe now choose a faction that fits your playstyle or a campaign you want to try out. I want to thank you for watching. I want to say have fun with playing your Rome campaigns, and I hope to see you in the next video. Till then, ciao ciao.